You're understanding that you have all of this inside of you, but throughout life, maybe you've forgotten a lot of your own power. So cannabis can allow you to get more in touch with that power. And then when you integrate it, you can start holding these frequencies even without the medicine. And that to me is the ultimate mission here, right? I don't want people just getting high all the time. I want people being high all the time, completely sober, you know?
Powerful.
That's the real way to live, in my opinion.
All right, guys, here with Ryan Sprague. We're going to talk cannabis today.
Dude, I'm excited, man. You know, it's funny too, because I think a lot of people have a very interesting view around cannabis, right? They think it's just Cheech and Chong. They think it's just making Fritos taste better. And I tell people that stuff does exist with cannabis, but it's 1% of what this plant really is. And when you look into the real history behind it, if you look into individuals like Chris Bennett, he's actually researched that cannabis goes back in spiritual use over 10,000 years.
Damn.
You know, like I was actually reading one of his recent books yesterday, and he was talking about how they've actually found resin from 2000 BC in the Jerusalem area that shows that not only were they connecting with cannabis, but they were connecting with cannabis specifically for the psychoactive effects.
Whoa.
Because they weren't finding the seeds, the stems, and other things they could use for hemp. They were actually finding like pretty much primitive hash, you know, like this cannabis resin mixed with animal dung that was showing that basically this came from the Silk Road, and they were actually utilizing it in this little tiny holy of holies type area, and they were essentially hotboxing it way back before hotboxing was really a thing.
Damn. Shout out to hotboxing, man.
I know, dude.
I used to hotbox my car in Jersey. Good times, man.
Yeah, dude.
Hotboxing, a little freestyle. Oh, man.
Never go wrong with that. You know?
Why would they mix animal dung with it, though?
You know, I'm not sure offhand. It was probably to allow it to heat up properly. That's what they were theorizing. They don't know for sure. Of course, they can't go back and ask them, but they were believing that it was something to do with how it was actually utilized and how it was mixed together so that it would actually smoke properly, basically, which was the evidence showing that, like, they weren't just taking buds from a plant and, like, throwing it on a hot flame or something like that. This was actually a product that was created like a primitive hash, you know? And that was, like, one of the most fascinating things, because if you go back in antiquity, a lot of the people, a lot of the critics will say, well, you know, we know they were using hemp to make rope and things like that, but we don't know they were using it to get high, right, for the psychoactive and intoxicating effects. But this now proves they were doing that. And he has a bunch of other evidence, too, going back up to 10,000 years to show they've been doing that for psychoactive effects ever since.
Got it.
Really cool.
Yeah, I asked that because I know mushrooms grow on cow dung. So.
Yeah.
And you actually have experience mixing cannabis with ketamine.
Yes, I do. Yeah. Cannabis and ketamine together is a very unique combination. You know, it's one of those things that a buddy of mine had told me that he had had a very Christ consciousness type experience with it. And for me, like, when I hear Christ consciousness, I don't necessarily associate it with Christianity or even Jesus Christ, but I talk about it in terms of a very high vibrational state. And those two medicines, when they mix together, have a very unique effect to it. You know, they are, in my experience, they really allow the heart chakra to open, but they allow you to also be a little bit dissociated more in the observer effect, right? More in the observer point of view, rather, so that you're reoriented to who and what you truly are. So when you're going through that experience, it changes you, right? Forever. I've had a couple of experiences, even one recently in June, that really just transformed a whole area of my life. It's really fascinating.
Really?
Yeah.
So what exactly happened?
Yeah. So for as long as I can remember, and this is part of my origin story, that, you know, I've been diagnosed with anxiety, right? Now, when you get diagnosed with something, it makes you think you have it, not that you're experiencing it. And so for a long time, my programming, patterning, and the stories and belief systems I created were around this diagnosis of anxiety. So when I was going to play live music or even do podcasting or do anything when I was kind of on air, I would get extremely nervous, you know, heart rate, intensity, all these kind of things going up. Now, after this experience, and again, I didn't even make the intention for this to happen. What happened was a friend and I were connecting with cannabis, and we were connecting with some ketamine. And it's a newer thing for me. You know, I'm newer to the ketamine space. I was in music festivals for years watching people bump things off spoons, and I'm like, no, thank you. It doesn't look like it's, you know, what I want. But when I started being around more people that were spiritually evolved, had really amazing conscious businesses, and they were saying it was valuable, I was like, okay, well, those are the results I'm looking for.
Right.
So I decided to experiment, because if not me, then who, right? I got to be able to talk about this stuff. So I went through this experience where we were doing breath work for about 3 hours, you know, just doing some ketamine and then hitting cannabis from time to time. And we had this one experience where this individual, he's very steeped in religion and spirituality, and he read this certain prayer. I forget exactly where it was from, but it was like the Sermon of Peace or something along that line. And he read it, and we went to go do another round of breath work, and I felt something shift within me. It's a very qualitative thing, of course. I don't know exactly what shifted. I can tell you the area it happened in.
Yep.
But I remember a couple of nights later, we were going to do our Breathe with Cannabis workshop. And when we do them live, sometimes like there's a lot of energy there, right? I can feel that kind of anxiety come on. And a couple of nights before, we were connecting with Cannabis, and Chris, one of my partners there, said, hey, you know, we should go do a jam session. And I was like, oh man, if only we had a guitar. And this other buddy I was with was like, oh dude, I have one here. And I was like, wow, that's really cool, right? Because I've been a musician for years. But typically I'm very nervous to play in front of people and things like that, right? It's still something I was, you know, trying to work through.
Yeah.
So we go into the other room. My one buddy starts hitting the handpan and I just start soloing over it. And it was amazing. An hour flew by and I was like, where is that feeling I usually get? And then Chris was like, dude, that was so awesome. We should do that for the sound healing at the end of the workshop tomorrow. Once again, I consciously thought, shouldn't I be feeling that feeling of anxiety? Didn't feel it. Next night we went to the workshop, and at the end I played guitar for the first time in years in front of people, felt no anxiety.
Wow.
So this is still unfolding for me. I mean, it's only been since June that happened. And usually, you know, I've found ways to work around those feelings and be able to down-regulatory breathe my way into a calm state. But I've never had this happen before. And so it's a very new thing and it's fascinating. And like I said, I'm pretty new to the ketamine space, but based on the results I've gotten so far, I know there's utility there. But just like cannabis or anything else, it's making sure you're doing it in a smart way, in a conscious way, and that you know what you're doing, why you're doing it, and what you're looking to get from it.
Right.
Otherwise, you're just messing with substances. And I'm not here to judge anyone who's messing with substances, but I know for me, at this point in my life, I'm only looking to do things that are going to help me evolve into who and what I truly am and be able to be a better service in my mission to the world.
I love that. It's almost like you got rid of a subconscious block.
Yeah, exactly. That's like exactly what it felt like. You know, I've spent years in coaching and therapy and all these different things and went to school for psychology. You know, that's what I originally wanted to do, was become a therapist, until I realized that, you know, you had to wear khakis every day and, you know, you had to smell office supplies. And I was like, it's not exactly me. So it's funny how like I've gone through so many of these different things, and that's why I always come back to plant medicine, because, you know, yes, there are challenges that you want to be aware of. Yes, it's not right for everyone, right? I never say cannabis or any of these medicines are right for everyone. But for certain types of people, these medicines can quantum leap your development. But you have to understand what to do alongside them, like you were talking about, right? Like, oh, it sounds like you removed a subconscious block. If you have the awareness of what's actually going on, let's say with cannabis, right? Shifting your brainwave state from beta into alpha and theta, and you know that theta is the doorway to the subconscious, then what you can do is actually start removing these limiting beliefs, these unconscious stories, things like that, and start working with them in a conscious way to get rid of the nonsense, right? Like I like to use an analogy of a dinner table. And on this dinner table, once you were able to eat meals, you made memories there, and for whatever reason, you started putting papers there and other things there, and now you've forgotten there's even a dinner table there, right? But the dinner table's still there. It's just covered over with a bunch of nonsense. And that's how I always analogize this idea of our heart, our soul, our spirit, etc. It's always there. There's nothing we have to go do to take things from the external environment and bring them in. It's more of a subtraction process. And so what I found these medicines to be so powerful in combining with coaching practices is that they allow you to take that nonsense off of the dinner table and reveal what was always there. You know, it's not something you have to go get. It's something you have to reveal. It's already inside of yourself.
I believe that 100%. Because when you get high, your emotions are coming to the surface, right?
Definitely.
'Cause some people get anxious.
Yeah.
Some people love it.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I'm glad you brought that up, because a lot of people will hit me up and say, oh, I can't use cannabis. It makes me anxious. And I'm like, hey, I have an invitation if you're open to receiving it. And if they say yes, I'm like, let me ask you this, right? What if you were to believe that instead of cannabis making you something, whether it's a perceived good thing or a perceived bad thing, not that good and bad even exist, they're a duality made in the mind, but let's just play an experiment. Let's say that cannabis makes you happier or makes you anxious. What if it didn't make you either of those things, but it cleared away some of the things that were blocking you from seeing what was already inside of you? And I think that for a lot of us, we found something we liked about cannabis, maybe in earlier years or whatever. And at the same time, though, we never got a user manual for how to utilize this plant.
Right.
Not to mention, we had to keep it in hiding and secret for fear of prosecution. And of course, it's no wonder why so many of us feel shame and guilt around utilizing it. But at the end of the day, if we start to actually learn what this plant is here to do and what it can do, I mean, I'm pure evidence of this. I mean, 4 years ago, I didn't have a podcast. I didn't have a business. You know, I could have never dreamed of going on podcasts like yours, the Aubrey Marcus podcast, et cetera. And I've utilized cannabis in a conscious way to manifest the reality I live in today.
Wow.
Now, that does not mean that cannabis manifested my reality. It means that I was able to show up for myself and seeing what cannabis was showing me, both the perceived positive things of like, wow, like these things that I really like to do, but also these perceived negative things, the ways I was holding myself back, not seeing my value, not seeing my power, to allow me to come out of my shell and really be able to be of service in that profound way that I'm able to now. And so, what I want everyone to know is that cannabis can be anything you want it to be, but you are the creator of your reality. So if you want a reality where cannabis makes you anxious, well, abracadabra, that's what's going to happen. But if you choose to start actually asking yourself what reality you're creating and asking yourself truly if you want to believe that anything external to you is making you something, that person making you so upset over there, this thing making you sick over there, it takes all the power away from you as the individual. Because last I checked, cannabis has never held a gun to any of our heads and forced us to connect with it. And until we take ownership over the actions we've done with the plant and all throughout our life, we'll never touch greatness, because I'm sure too, right? Like, I imagine your life exponentially grew when you started taking ownership over the decisions you were making and how you're showing up in the world.
100%.
And I'm sure it's something you see in every guest you talk with, right? The ones that are really fulfilled, really successful, it's because they know they are the captain of their own soul, for better or worse. And that's the ultimate thing I found, to be able to allow not just these medicines, but your entire life to be magical in nature.
Agreed. When I got out of victim mentality, which was a majority of my life skyrocketed.
Yeah.
I used to blame everyone else. It was never my fault.
Yeah. And that's kind of what society wants us to do, right? They're trying to push us more into, hey, you're a victim. You can't do anything about it. And again, I'll tell everyone, like, it's very attractive to think of yourself like a victim, right? In your smallness, because if you don't think it's your fault, then there's nothing you have to do. But if it's not your fault, then how can you be the solution, right? And that's the part that a lot of people don't understand yet. It's the part that I didn't understand for years, is that when I was expecting the whole world to fit my, internal demands, and I was upset with the external reality when people would trigger me and things like that, and I would blame them, I was taking all the power away from myself, and I was just getting more and more disempowered. And once I started realizing this and started doing something different, of course, as within, so without, as above, so below. When I changed my internal state, the things I was looking at, the things I was experiencing changed along with it, because everything starts and ends as an inside job.
I love that.
Yeah.
I'm glad people like you are shifting the narrative on cannabis.
Thank you.
I feel like our parents' generation really were, I don't know if they were afraid of it or just the programming around it was crazy, right?
Yeah, man. 100%. Even in DARE, right? You think about like the DARE program, right?
Yeah.
Hey, drugs are bad. You should never do them. But here, we have some, and tell us if your parents use them. It's like, it's this completely asinine thing where cannabis is lumped into other drugs like et cetera. And one of the funny things that I tell everyone, and again, like I say this all the time, don't believe anything I say. You don't have to take anything on for your own truth. But what I will say is this, at the end of the day, cannabis has been here for over 10,000 years. Again, we have an endocannabinoid system that has found the phytocannabinoids in cannabis so powerful that we actually create endocannabinoids that mimic the effects and the structure of the phytocannabinoids, THC, CBD, et cetera, that we find in the cannabis plant. What other plant do we connect with that has that exact interplay with our endocannabinoid system, the largest regulatory system in our whole body that deals with almost all of our autonomic functions, nervous system control, sleep, appetite, etc. It's really wild, and at the end of the day, I think a lot of the fear mongering around cannabis that a lot of people don't know that they're still kind of expressing from, it started in the 30s. And a lot of people don't know why cannabis became so demonized. But, there's been different periods throughout history where it's become demonized, especially in religious and spiritual practices, because, religion doesn't want you to be able to commune with God yourself. They want to play that intermediary role. And, oh, by the way, they need money too, right?
Yeah.
So it's a business. Now, when you think back to the 30s, there were a couple individuals, Harry Anslinger, who became the first head of the DEA, William Randolph Hearst, and Andrew Mellon. And Andrew Mellon owned one of the biggest journalism empires of that time. Now, you think about the media today, even with the internet and whatnot, and how crazy people get entangled into what's on CNN and NBC and all these mainstream media platforms. But imagine in the 30s, right? If you controlled all the newspapers and there was no internet, you pretty much had the entire narrative on your side.
Right.
So they got together and realized, wait a minute, we have vested interests in oil, nylon, and textile industries, and this plant, hemp, is really going to throw a curveball into our business, right? Because you can make so many things from it. So they decided to come up with this myth called reefer madness, where, and look this up, right? For anyone, it's going to sound crazy when I say this, but it's 100% accurate. They came up with a myth that what was happening was Mexican men were coming over the border of the United States and raping white women with this new medicine, this new substance no one had ever seen called marijuana. So they went to Senate and Congress overnight and told them, like, hey, we have to ban this right away. And they were kind of like, well, shouldn't we have, like, a little bit of discussion around it? And they were like, we need to ban it right away. So overnight, this plant marijuana got banned, and every doctor woke up in the morning and realized, wait, marijuana is cannabis? What the hell just happened? Because at that point, cannabis was a part of over 85% of all medicines on the market.
Damn.
So, again, like when people look back to why they think cannabis is so bad, it just comes down to greed. Now, again, does that mean there's no things to worry about with cannabis? No, of course. We want to talk about harm reduction. We want to talk about mitigating risk. But again, the fact that alcohol and pharmaceuticals are everywhere should show people that there's nothing about cannabis that is going to be anywhere damaging as those two things. Even if you're smoking all day, every day, you may lose motivation, you may have some challenging things happen, but you're not going to die.
Right.
You're not going to get DTs, right? So at the end of the day, I recommend everyone go research this, right? Don't just take what I say at face value, but go see for yourself how these things happen, because it can be quite a red pilling experience. And we've seen this happen with so many things. I mean, even right now, during the last 4 years and different things, how media skews things to put people in a fear state,
right.
And people like Aaron talk about how the negative and positive polarity, right? That kind of dichotomy, where the negative polarity runs on fear, positive polarity runs on love. So when you start watching these news channels and things like that, from that lens, you start seeing like, oh, wow, they want to keep us in a fear state. Now, again, maybe they don't have some big conspiracy or whatever, but at the end of the day, people in fear are going to buy more things to make them safe, right? To make them feel safe.
Yep.
Because they don't feel safe internally, so they need the external world to fit their internal demands, So it's very interesting.
It is. I used to be in a fear state. I used to watch the news every day, man.
Yeah.
I had no idea I was in that state, but I definitely was.
Yeah.
Crazy.
It's one of the easiest ways to not only get yourself entrenched into a victim mentality, but live a life where you're just fearful of everything. And, I've seen this in my parents. I've seen it in a lot of the elders around where, the idea of the news is great, right? You want to stay up to date on what's going on. But at the end of the day, right, when they're talking about different wars happening and things like that, I know that it wakes something up inside of us that makes us want to do something about it. But the best thing we can do for any of these issues is work on ourselves.
Right.
And that's the kind of like, kind of backwards way that most people don't think about it, because it's so easy to look out there and say, hey, I want to fix that problem out there. But let's be real. How many of us are going to go to Israel or, over to that area of the world right now and actually pick up a gun or whatever and try to actually help things? There are some people doing that, right? But a lot of people are just watching the news, getting all the fear and all the anxiety, and then not doing anything about it. And my question to them is, why, right? Why do you have to do that? Like, why couldn't you go out there and find something positive to do, right? Start a nonprofit, start donating money, do whatever you want to do, but don't just stay in a fear state where you're just worried about everything and thinking that you have to do that to be in support of XYZ thing that they're portraying.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You also have an interesting take on edibles. So you believe you can't be addicted to cannabis.
Yeah, and I'll tell you why, right? And this is kind of my, controversial topic around addiction. Now, again, one of the things that society does very well is they make the result the cause, right? So when someone is feeling addicted to cannabis, right, they're utilizing it a lot more often than they want to. Maybe they're telling themselves they're going to stop tomorrow and they wake up and keep doing it. All the symptoms of addictive behavior. My question is this, right? How often has cannabis held a gun to your head and make you connect with it, right? And the reason I ask that, it might seem like a silly question, but the thing is, it's trying to pattern interrupt people into realizing, like, listen, no one wakes up and comes into this world addicted, right, to anything, right? Now, again, you could talk about crack babies and things like that, but, without that kind of, one example, when you look into why addiction actually happens, it's not cannabis that people become addicted to. It's not alcohol people become addicted to. It's not people become addicted to. They become addicted to escaping the feelings of discomfort stemming from traumas within them. Now, the result of that is maybe a dependency on alcohol, a dependency on or opiates or whatever. But if you just go after that, right? Like, I got to stop doing or I got to stop connecting with cannabis, right? Well, all that's going to happen is you still have all that discomfort within you. So maybe your addiction hops to something healthier, like a gym addiction or things like that. But no matter what you're doing, whatever that's switching to, you're still in survival mode. You're not thriving yet. And that's why I say, listen, you don't have to believe what I say when it comes to addiction, right? It's just my point of view, because at one point I did believe I was addicted to cannabis and I would keep trying to stop cannabis and it was just terrible. It was completely inefficient. It wasn't working until I started to actually ask myself, what is driving me to go to cannabis? And I started asking myself why. So what I would do is every time I connected with cannabis, I would be honest with myself and I would say, why am I doing this right now? And the answers that came out were, I didn't like my job. I felt disempowered. I felt hurt over being cheated on in the past, and all these things that started to illuminate, oh, that's why I'm going to this plant, because I haven't yet figured out how to give myself the comfort that I am seeking. So naturally, if I don't know how to do it internally, I'm going to seek it from the external world in anything, right? Pornography, bad food, whatever it is, right? To get that dopamine hit, to put my attention somewhere else other than what I was living with. But once I started actually dealing with those root issues and doing different coaching processes, plant medicine experiences, et cetera, and started to release those, wouldn't you know it, all of a sudden it was easier than ever to just not connect with cannabis. I didn't even think about it in the way because I was feeling so good that I didn't need something else to make me feel better anymore, you know? And that's when I started going, wow, I wonder if we're putting the emphasis on the wrong place. And when you look at the world, you know, the law of correspondence from Hermetic states, as within, so without, as above, so below. But most of the world is living as without, so within, right? Thinking that the external world is their problem and not their internal reality. And so once you start shifting what's internal, everything external starts shifting too. It's like that quote says, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change as well. And that's the perfect embodiment of what I've experientially understood and experienced through going through this challenge with cannabis. And since then, I've helped over 500 people break their addiction to cannabis, not by focusing on having them cut it back on cannabis or make discipline, you know, for themselves or anything, but actually doing coaching work to get clear on what's going on and utilizing cannabis to get into that subconscious state, to start revealing those things that are hard to see when your ego and default mode network are doing what they need to do to protect you. But the thing is, they don't have the full scope of the image, right? They're protecting you from things that are actually much easier to feel and let go of than try to get away from for years and years and years. I mean, I've had many clients that are like, dude, I've been living with this for 10 to 15 years, and within 2 hours, I'm free of it now.
Wow.
And it doesn't happen that way every time, right? I don't want anyone to think that in 2 hours, everyone's going to be free of this stuff. But again, like what I've noticed is that in a period of time that's usually no longer than 3 months, almost everyone I've ever worked with has been free of what they thought their addiction was.
Holy
and
crap.
now they're just so much easier to be able to balance cannabis in their life, because now they're not using cannabis to get away from pain. They're using cannabis to run towards what they want and run towards their pleasure. And that differentiality between running away from pain and running towards pleasure is a big thing, right? Because where you put your attention, energy flows. So it's been amazing to be able to not just do this for myself, but be able to replicate it time and time again. And we see this happening in our Breathe with Cannabis workshops too. People coming through, 2 hours going on a ceremonial cannabis and breathwork journey and coming out saying, wow, that was stronger than my ayahuasca experiences.
Damn.
And the great thing is they're back on ground level in 2 hours and able to go to bed or hang out with their family or do whatever. And they're able to actually walk away feeling lighter than they came in with. And that to me is the most fulfilling thing of any of the work I do.
I might have to try one of these.
Dude, you have to, man.
Dude,
It would be so
I'm a fan
amazing.
of breath work.
Yes, dude, you would love it, man. If you haven't, I don't think you've met Chris yet, but the breath work he does, and for everyone listening, this isn't just like sitting around in the circle doing breath work. Nothing against that. I do that a lot of the time. But this is actually going on a full journey. So the music that is created for these journeys, he creates with his business partner, Johnny Buffalo, who's a world-class beatboxer, classically trained musician. So these breath tracks have the breath sounds embedded in them, solfeggio frequencies, binaural beats.
Wow.
All you have to do is just lay down, put an eye mask on, and get taken on a 40-minute journey. And that's after we meditate and do the integrated family systems parts work with cannabis that I do, and all the rest of the stuff. But it's amazing, man. You would love it. I'll give you a free pass.
Dude, I'd love to. Holy crap.
Yeah.
I want to conquer my cannabis fear, actually.
Dude, let's go, bro.
Yeah.
I would love to support you in that.
And you're actually shifting my mindset, because I always thought it was cannabis causing my anxiety, but it's probably something within me.
Yeah. And again, like for everyone here, right? Like for everyone listening, what I want to say right here, because you just said something really powerful, is that if we choose to believe, which not everyone has to, but if we choose to believe that we are the creator of our own reality, then like I said before, if you believe cannabis gives you anxiety, then that will be the reality you live in, right? But if you start to shift that and go, wait a minute, maybe I'm hearing something someone's saying, and let me try that out, right? Let me just experiment. This is the great thing with cannabis, is that one of the things it does, or at least it did for me and it does for a lot of my clients, is when I talk to people about intention, right? Like you probably understand the power of intention, right? But it's hard to feel. Like we might put an intention on our water, but we don't really feel a lot from it. We have faith that it works. But with cannabis and plant medicine, you can feel the magic behind intention. And what happens is, let's say you intend in your next ceremonial experience to be like, okay, I want to see how this anxiety is actually my creation, right? I want to experiment here. Then let's say that manifests. Now you go, not only did I realize that, oh, it wasn't cannabis, but now I realize my intention is very powerful. Now you have more ammo, if you will, to put that intention on food, water, and throughout your whole life. And even if you can't feel it in your beta brainwave state,
right,
you know it's working because you've had the direct experience of it. And I think that's one of the things that I invite everyone to do, right? That's why I always say, don't believe anything I say, because I think the world is steeped in intellectual knowledge. And I think it's a thirst trap to think that we understand something because we can repeat it or understand it intellectually. Nothing makes up for a direct experience. And that's why I tell everyone, like, cannabis is not for everyone. It's not everyone's medicine. And the only way you'll know is by experimenting with it, right? And, you know, the other analogy I give here usually is that if you want to understand what an apple is, you can research apples, what grow season they have, different varieties, what kind of soil they thrive in. But none of that is going to teach you what an apple is more than actually taking a bite of an apple.
Right.
Now, once you have that bite of an apple, now you go, wow, why did I like that experience so much? Now you can go research it and go, oh, it was pectin. Oh, it was this variety I liked, right? So I think there's kind of like a inversion that most people do, right? Like for me, if I experience something and I discern that it's powerful in my life, then I'm going to go research it from that place of experiential understanding versus what I used to do, which is the thirst trap of, you know, going to school and going to these things, reading things in textbooks and thinking I know them because I read about it.
School smart, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I think part of my fear comes from a bad edible experience.
Oh, yeah,
So
dude. We can talk about that.
Yeah, I was in Vegas. I ate 10 mgs. I was fine. Next day, I got cocky. I ate 20. I thought I was going to die.
Yeah.
Dude, I threw up everywhere. I was crawling in the hotel of Luxor in the hallway.
Dude.
It was terrible.
Do you want me to talk about why that could have happened?
Yeah, why?
So there's a couple different reasons, right? We'll talk about the physiological aspect first. So one thing people don't understand about edibles is that when you ingest cannabis versus inhaling it, delta-9 THC, the most popular phytocannabinoid in existence, it actually gets converted by your liver into a totally different cannabinoid called 11-hydroxy-THC, which is between 1 and 7 times more intoxicating to the CB1 receptor sites, which are the receptor sites responsible for the intoxicating effects of cannabis. So in short, you get a much stronger intoxicating effect from ingesting an edible. Now, the other thing too, and you sound like me, I don't know if it's a tall guy thing, but you know, like one of the things with cannabis is that everyone's metabolization rate of THC is different. So it doesn't really matter if you're small, big, overweight, underweight, whatever. I worked at a dispensary for 5 years with over 5,000 people and kind of did my own little case study of this, where I found that some of the smallest women, right, they're like 110 pounds soaking wet, could eat 200-300 milligrams.
What?
Where guys like us would be like, hey, 20 milligrams is like an ordeal rather than an experience. So everyone's endocannabinoid system is wired differently. So I tell everyone in the beginning, there is a little bit of trial and error, or as the kids say these days, fucking around and finding out, right? And that's why I tell everyone, start low and go slow. You can always take more. But as you found out, it's hard to subtract when you're already there. It's not impossible. Yeah. You can have CBD on hand. CBD will act as a brake pedal to your endocannabinoid system and bring you down. You can do black pepper kernels, which have a terpene called beta-caryophyllene, which negate a lot of the intoxicating effects of delta-9 THC. And then you can also do down-regulatory breathing. But those are a couple of the physiological, scientific reasons that could have happened. Now, the other thing, though, is that tobacco, cannabis, ayahuasca, even psilocybin, LSD, all these medicines have the ability to be a purgatory medicine, right, to make you purge. And a lot of times it's that rot that we have living inside of us, whether you want to think of it as limiting beliefs, unconscious stories, or you want to talk about it as just like tension in the body, whatever it is, without a story attached to it. A lot of times it works to get that out of you. And so if you don't have that context and then you start puking, you're like, oh my God, I'm dying, right? That's what I mean when I say we never got a user manual for this plan. And that's why I love talking about this stuff, because for me, until I started learning all of this, I was like, oh, that makes sense now why I was experiencing that. Oh, no wonder when I ate that edible, this happened, right? Now you're able to create context, which allows the fear to be mitigated. There's actually a reason for that happening. It's not just random.
Yeah, it's good to know. Yeah, if I do it again, I'll start smaller. I didn't realize how big the jump was from 10 to 20.
Yeah, it can be exponential, and that's going to be based on your individual endocannabinoid system makeup. Now, there is the gentleman I know named Len May who has a test. I think its business is called Endo Health, and you can get a DNA test done for your specific endocannabinoid system, and he will tell you what cannabinoids, what ratios, 1-to-1, 2-to-1, et cetera, work best for your system.
Love that.
So for someone like you, right, if you really want to do like a lot of the legwork, that could be a good test to get to kind of figure out like, what is my system really like and how can I best supplement for that? Because for someone like you may not even need cannabis. You could really benefit from hemp products. And that's what I tell everyone. Like, you know, even though cannabis is meant for everyone, hemp can work for a lot more people because there's not intoxicating effects. But you still get a minute amount of the THCA, which THC in its acid form is not intoxicating. It's not intoxicating until you put a flame to it, and it goes through a process called decarboxylation. That's when THCA converts into delta-9 THC. So if you're doing hemp products and things like that, you're satiating your endocannabinoid system, but you don't have to be high to experience it. And that's a great way that even people that maybe are really fearful around cannabis or just find it's not their plant, that they may be able to benefit from this space as a result. Because, you know, one of the things that a lot of people don't know about cannabis as well is that I have seen with my own two eyes and my own experience cannabis curing and treating cancer in people. I mean, I helped my father through the end of his life with cancer.
Wow.
And over that time, he had small cell carcinoma. It was stage 4 by the time we discovered it. And so it was very aggressive, very fast moving. So he got diagnosed in July of 2014, and they gave him until October at best.
Damn.
Right? Now, I didn't know that. He didn't tell me that at first. So after a couple of weeks, he started experiencing some real pain, and we started administering RSO to him, Rick Simpson oil, which is really like a full spectrum cannabis extract, right, for lack of a better term. And for anyone listening who's rolling their eyes right now, because I can understand, right, cannabis curing cancer, these kind of things, you can look up Phoenix Tears, Rick Simpson's organization. You can actually go on PubMed now and find that THC has killed cancer cells in mice, right?
Wow.
Now, again, I've seen this in multitudes of different human beings, my father being one of them, where he had stage 4 cancer. Now, again, he wasn't going to quit smoking cigarettes and doing the things that gave him cancer to begin with.
Yep.
But what I discovered was, let me see if I can, you know, mitigate a lot of this pain he's going through and things like that. So we took the last harvest we ever grew together. I started growing with my dad 15 years ago, and I turned it into RSO, and we started administering it to him. And not only did it stop his cancer from growing about 75%, so when he was getting his scans back, his tumors were still there, but they had slowed their growth about 75%. And we are in Boston, right? So we have Dana-Farber, one of the top cancer centers in the country, and they were flabbergasted. They were like, what are you doing? And I told them, we're connecting with cannabis with him. And they were like, no, God, no, that can't be it, right? Because again, for a lot of people, they can't go from cannabis is a drug that rots your brain to cannabis now cancer,
Too
right?
big of a jump.
Exactly. And what I want everyone to know is I'm not saying that you can live whatever quality of life you want, eating food and whatever, and cannabis will just save the day. It's not cannabis alone that does this. Cannabis plays an integral role to stop the cancer growing and start to go after the cells. But then we also have to go through what gave us cancer in the first place, whatever trauma is in there, whatever darkness is in there, switching our diets up if we're eating diet, getting away from toxic relationships, right? There's a lot of parts that go into this, but I've seen this. I went to a school in 2011 called the New England Grassroots Institute, where the founders of the school, this is what they did on the side. They would work with cancer patients. They would donate medicine to them. And so when I interned for them, I ended up getting to work with a lot of these patients. And I got to see them coming in with scans, a multitude of months later coming in again, no cancer. And it was wild. And I wouldn't have believed it if I didn't see it with my own two eyes. But you know, again, I want to make sure once again, because I understand that I'm in a position of influence and I don't want anyone out there thinking that, oh, I'm just not going to do chemo or radiation. Like everyone's got to make their own decision. But what I am here to say is there are other options. And of course, you just use discernment. It's the ultimate muscle to wield here in this lifetime. But look into these things, you know, because again, the findings you may find may surprise you.
Absolutely. How do you find good quality cannabis?
Yeah, that's a good question. So that's actually one of the biggest epidemics going on right now, in my opinion, because a lot of people think, because again, we never got a user manual for it, that the truly high quality cannabis is just how much THC it has and does it look pretty, right? And does it have a funny name? That's pretty much what most people go to the dispensary looking for.
Yeah.
They shop for cannabis like they do for food, right? Like it's gasoline, looking for the cheapest prices, etc. And what you really want to look into is when you look into shamanistic societies that practice utilizing cannabis, there's a very specific person, usually the shaman or medicine worker, in the village that grows the plants because they need to make sure that their energy is not getting entwined into the medicine. Now, again, we understand this. If I walked into this room and I was in a bad mood, even if I didn't say anything, you would have been able to sense something, right?
Yeah.
So we all know this exists, but these qualitative things, usually a lot of people roll their eyes at because we're in a very left brain dominant society. If we only believe what we can see and measure with our eyes. But what I tell everyone is, you know, if you're able to enter your grow space in a high quality of energy, that plant is going to have a better experience being grown. Now, aside from that, on the more linear left brain side, we can look at how it's grown, right? The utilization of methodology. And so living soil, Korean natural farming, regenerative agriculture, biodynamic farming, biogeometry, these are the things I practice because at the end of the day, we all know that if you're eating factory farmed meat, right? Obviously it's horrible for a multitude of reasons, but one of the reasons is because if you're ingesting meat that was grown from animals that were stressed out, anxious, terrified, you're now interacting with that meat that's going to upload that anxiety, stress, and terror into you. Why don't we think that happens with plants? Well, because for some reason, we still think that plants are not conscious, but animals are, when everything on this earth is conscious. And so at the end of the day, I usually get a lot of eye rolls at this too, and that's why I'm so excited to be able to share for anyone that's like, I don't believe this for one bit, right? Now, again, you don't need to, but look up a guy named Joe Patitucci and his system called Plant Wave. He's actually done this with cannabis too, and he's done it with a lot of other plants too, where he hooks these plants up to electrodes so they sing songs, right? And basically what happens is if someone walks into the room projecting emotions of hate, all of a sudden they start singing a very minor key, their leaves get droopy, etc. They come in projecting emotions of love, all of a sudden their tone gets much more major key and they start to really lift up their leaves.
Wow.
And so again, correlation not equaling causation. I'll let everyone else be the judge of that. But for me, I can tell you that, people like Aubrey Marcus, for instance, right? When I met him, he was not a fan of cannabis. He had not been ever a fan of cannabis. He was vehemently against it because he had had so many experiences very similar to your edible experience. He had also seen people at parties that he had invited them to, dabbing people out and just making them go to sleep. And you just have this whole view around cannabis of like, this is silly, right? Yeah. So when I connected with him and I got him some of my cannabis, after I'd gotten Paul check my cannabis and he was like, dude, this is different than anything I've ever tried. 2 weeks went by and I wake up one day to an email from Aubrey about this big and he's like, listen, dude, I got to tell you a story. He's like, I've had a very negative view of cannabis my entire life. I've seen all these different examples of why cannabis is what I believed. And I went into this with an open mind. I tried your stuff and now I'm obsessed. Like this is so valuable in my experience that I need to know what the hell you're doing. And can you come down and do a show?
Wow.
And that's when I realized, okay, this is definitely something different. Because at that time, a lot of the people I was connecting with cannabis with, they weren't into spirituality. They weren't into raising your consciousness. So to them, it was just cannabis is cannabis, right? It looked nice, so it was good. But when I started gifting it to people like Paul Chek, Ben Greenfield, Aubrey Marcus, and they all started going, dude, there is something really different with this. That's when I started really being able to notice it myself. And one of the things with biogeometry is that when you're growing indoor and or outdoor, we have a lot of radio waves, EMFs, things like that that are interfering with our biofield. This is why I always wear biogeometry gear on myself. But at the same time, plants have a biofield too. So I'm not someone who's saying down with technology, right? I'm saying, hey, why don't we have a yes and here? Why don't we find how to utilize technology in a way that's not going to harm us in doing so? So now when you put biogeometry into these grow spaces, what I noticed was that I actually got about 20% more yield and about 3% more cannabinoid content overall when I tested my flower after the first time using biogeometry.
Wow.
And I wasn't even caring about that. For me, I grow for myself. I grow to gift it away. But I had been growing the same strains. I had the same soil. I didn't change anything. And all I did was just add these certain shapes in, right? It may sound complicated when I say biogeometry. It's not complicated at all. It's like literally a caveman can do it. Yeah, just adding certain shapes, right, that emit a certain energy quality called BG3. And for anyone that's curious about this, look up Ibrahim Karim's work. He has 20 to 30 years of double-blind, placebo-controlled studies on this, because I know it sounds woo-woo for sure. But, again, like I put these shapes in there, and all of a sudden, when I harvest, I'm like, holy this is more than I've ever harvested before. Let me test it and figure out if I had some amount go up. So I found that 2.5 to 3% total cannabinoid content went up. And I forget exactly what it was for terpene volume 2, but that went up as well. And so it was very interesting. And then when I started experiencing it, right, and actually connecting with it, I was like, yeah, this does feel different. And I get that over and over and over again. And I brought some for you. So you can have it when you're ready, but you can let me know, right? I tell everyone, don't believe what I say. Try it for yourself, right? Let me know what your experience is, because I never want to tell anyone what anything is, right? Yeah. I don't want to, be in a position of influence and try to get people to believe me, because for me, to the degree you really believe something, you don't need anyone else to believe it. I'm not here to convince anyone. I'm not here to tell anyone that cannabis is the way. It's the only way. It's not, right? It's one of infinite different paths that can reach the same destination. But, you know, as I always say, the only path that's wrong is the one that tells you it's the only way to get there, you know? And so that's what I found with cannabis. It's really magical, and it continues to open up. You know, I've done things like feed my plant psilocybin teas, and I got that idea because I had connected with some cannabis that a certain tribe had grown, that they did ayahuasca on this property too. And after the ayahuasca ceremonies, they dump all the brew onto the cannabis plants. And so a buddy of mine had mentioned this when I was out in California. He was like, do you want some? I'm like, of course I want some. I want to see what that's all about. When I tried it, there was a definite different energy to it. And that got me thinking. I'm like, well, I don't have access to ayahuasca, but I do have access to psilocybin. What if I start feeding my plants psilocybin teas? And lo and behold, there is definitely a different energy to it, right? Now I have a couple other growers that are on a much larger scale than I am. I just am a home grower, and I consult with different bigger grows. But, you know, now I have a couple other people doing it too that are like, dude, there is definitely something different here. So again, correlation not equaling causation. I don't know. I'll let people be the judge of that, but I've definitely noticed something different for sure.
That is cool. So are you, when you smoke that one with the psilocybin, are you hallucinating on it?
Not hallucinating by like by definition, but a lot of what's happening is there's a different spirit. Now, for anyone who's connected with psilocybin versus, you know, cannabis versus ayahuasca, you'll understand what I mean when I say a different spirit. It's almost like a different energy. It's like if, you know, me and you were hanging out and then someone else comes, right? There's a different energy to it. That energy can open up different things, right? I think a lot of the people these days call it having codes, right? You know, like I have joy codes or you have business codes or whatever, right? And we can pick that up in each other. Psilocybin for me has like a squeegee code, right? And it's like the silliest way to explain it, but it just kind of squeegees things out of me. Where cannabis, on the other hand, allows me to be more observative of my inner reality, but it doesn't necessarily push me to do anything about it. I'm just kind of observing it. Whereas psilocybin's like, you're coming with me and we're going to squeegee this out of you, you know? So I feel a little bit more of that when I connect with that medicine and ceremony.
Are you microdosing cannabis?
I do. Yeah, I microdose cannabis. Whenever I connect with cannabis, like the funny thing for me is that I've really only ever liked cannabis at night. So when I do connect with cannabis, which is typically only on weekends, and again, like when I say that, I had a lot of people reach out to me like, I'm connecting on a weekday. Does that mean I'm in an unhealthy relationship? I'm like, no, guys, this is just my personal method. And my course, Clarity with Cannabis, the whole point of it is to figure out what a healthy relationship for your individual needs looks like. So for me, what I found is that microdosing different cannabinoids can be extremely powerful for being able to just knock on the door of deeper perception, enhanced creativity, and things like that. And when I'm doing that, you know, the way in which I teach cannabis is to learn from it, right? To have a co-creative and co-communicative relationship, to ask the plant, show me how I can access this even without you, you know, and then integrate that. And then when you've integrated that, okay, let me go back under again and learn something new and then integrate that. And so it's really, to me, like working with a coach, right? Whether it's microdosing, macrodosing, et cetera, just the same way you work with a coach. Like if you have a business mentor, he might tell you, okay, Sean, you're going to get this set up by next week because maybe you told him this was important to you. And he's like, okay, you're going to get this email campaign set up. Well, if you don't get that done, there's not really anything else you and him can talk about, right? He's like, well, you didn't get the thing done. We can't really move forward. But if you show up and you got those emails done, now he's like, okay, let's move to the next step. And that's how these plant medicines work too. And that's what I tell everyone. Like you can be stuck forever on the lesson of just, you know, numbing out, tuning out, et cetera. But cannabis is so much more than that. But again, it's not the plant's job to tell you anything. It's not the plant's job to know why you're there. It's your end of the bargain to make sure that you're intentional with what you're looking to do, why you're doing it, and how you will tell if it's being beneficial in your life. That's our end of the bargain. And until we take ownership over that, the plant will never open up these deeper levels that it can go to, like it's been going to for over 10,000 years. And again, you can look at Chris Bennett's work, which is incredibly complex and amazing, where he's tracked it back to so many different sects of religious and spiritual practices, from the Scythians to, you know, ancient Jerusalem. I mean, all over the place. The Silk Road. I mean, this is not new. You know, what I'm talking about here may seem new in 2024, but it's actually one of the oldest rituals and traditions that humanity has had.
Wow. Yeah. That's good to know. I feel like the stuff they make these days is too strong, dude.
It is, dude. And I'll tell you why. Because somewhere along the way, people got obsessed with just one phytocannabinoid, which is delta-9 THC. And an interesting thing a lot of people don't know is that cannabis has actually lost a lot of its psychedelic properties since the modern hybridization movement that happened mostly in like the 80s, when people started bringing seeds over from Afghanistan and the Middle East and mixing them with the equatorial sativas found in Mexico and, you know, down in South America and places like that. But, you know, molecules like THCP, THCV, a lot of these like minor cannabinoids have now been all but driven out because of everyone crazing for this delta-9 THC. Now, what's interesting about this, and this is just a theory on me, is that if you look at what delta-9 THC does, it's not like there's never a place for it. Like if you have intense chronic pain, if you're going through cancer, things like that, like, yeah, there's an emphasis on high THC being beneficial. But at the same time, what does high THC also do? THC is a dissociate, right? It dissociates you. So when you think about this idea of people numbing out, tuning out, and being in a very disempowered state of reality, again, it's a correlation that this cannabinoid has gotten driven up as people have become more disempowered, more anxious, more depressed, et cetera.
Wow.
You know, so it's an interesting correlation.
That
you know,
is
and,
interesting.
And that's one of the reasons why I really talk a lot about landrace and heirloom genetics and growing your own, because the only way to make sure that you know how it's grown, you know how it's grown by, and you also can pick the varieties you want, so you don't have to just go get gelato or Skittles at every dispensary, is grow your own. You know,
the stuff you see at these spots where you could see the crystals and you take one hit and you're rocked.
Oh, yeah. And what's fun about that? Like for me, like I love hitting a volcano, having a nice circle and being able to go through 3, 4, 5 bags and be able to have a deep conversation where we all grow, we all benefit as a result, we can feel the love. I don't want to hit something one time and be blasted. You know, that's just not fun to me. Like, you know, there was a time in my life where that was fun where, you know, I call this level 1, right? Level 1 of cannabis is how high can I get, right? Everything you're doing is about just the effect of how high you can get.
Smoke offs.
Exactly.
Those are the days.
Yeah. Hot boxing.
I had a Gravitron.
Oh my God,
the glass
dude.
one.
Oh my God. It's so funny too, because when you get into level 2, it's less about the effect and more about what the effect brings forth. So it goes from how high can I get to what varieties, what cannabinoids, what terpenes, and what ratios are going to lead to a certain result. Maybe enhanced psychic senses, maybe enhanced creativity, maybe enhanced intimacy, right? So it's no longer about how high you get. It's about how do I get the right dose to get what I want to come out of it.
Right.
And that's like where it gets a lot more fun, because then you start realizing like, holy love making can get so much better. My creativity can get so much better. And again, when you're on that level, you're not thinking that you need cannabis to do that. You're understanding that you have all of this inside of you, but throughout life, maybe you've forgotten a lot of your own power. So cannabis can allow you to get more in touch with that power. And then when you integrate it, you can start holding these frequencies even without the medicine. And that to me is the ultimate mission here, right? I don't want people just getting high all the time. I want people being high all the time, completely sober, you know?
Powerful.
That's the real way to live, in my opinion.
Yeah,
you know?
volcano's like the cleanest way to inhale it too.
This is my favorite way, you know?
I love
like
the volcano.
I literally travel with mine. I bring it in my suitcase.
Oh, yeah? You could travel with it?
Oh, yeah, 100%.
What?
Yeah, we brought it to Mexico before, the whole thing. Yeah.
Wow, that's a good travel hack.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's awesome. Ryan, when's your next event, man? Where can people find out more about you?
Yeah, so you can go to @TheRealRyanSprague. That's my Instagram profile. I always have everything up there. Our next Breathe with Cannabis event is coming up in August. You can go to breathewithcannabis.com. We have all the events up there. You can buy a membership for the whole year if you want. You can also, in the show notes, I'll make sure I put the free training I have in there on how to break your addiction to cannabis without having to quit in 30 days. People can check out the courses, the Conscious Cannabis Collective, my big mastermind I run, but everything you can find right at The Real Ryan Sprague. You can also check out my podcast there, the This One Time on Psychedelics podcast. So I love connecting with people. If people can't tell, I love talking. So definitely hit me up, reach out, ask any questions. I'm happy to answer or support any way I can.
Love it. We'll link below. Thanks for coming on, man. That was fun.
Absolutely.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you.
Thanks for watching, guys. See you tomorrow. Get high.